Kumlen and a block Gemara. This is the Gemara from the first day Shavuos on Sunday. Today's block is Daf Tzadik Amid Aleph. What we're learning here is an interesting machlekes, a very fundamental machlekes between Chizda and Rabbah. And basically, we know that if you repaid a kohen with truma to meya rather than truma to hayra, let's say if you gave a kohen truma to meya, according to the Torah, you still did a valid truma because it says that you shouldn't do it, you'll carry a sin. Like the law you said, the very fact that it says that you will carry a sin proves that something happened. Otherwise, what are you carrying a sin for? So Torah, it's a valid truma, but what it did was you're cheating from the kohen. The kohen can't do much with the truma to meya other than burn it. So therefore, it says if you did it by mistake, okay, but if you did it b'mezid, it's not a valid truma. And Chizda understood what it means not a valid truma. It means that even what you set aside does not become truma. And Abnosim, the son of Rabbi Ishia, he says, no, the truma is truma because my Torah is truma, is valid truma. But the rest of the field that you gave this truma for, it has to be redone again. So then we moved on from there to a general discussion that if the Torah says something is valid, can the Rabbanan come intervene and say that it's not valid anymore? And this we have here a discussion between Rabbah and Avchiza. And the last thing we learned was a brisa where you have a young girl, who is married to a person by her mother, or by her brothers, and therefore it's only midrabanan. And we say that they're considered married, and a number of dinim occur as a result of that. The first thing we talked about was that the husband inherits her. We questioned that because her father inherits her. So we explained that she's considered a meis mitzvah. Because once they know that the inheritance doesn't go to them, they no longer. We're talking about how is it that the husband is allowed to be metame himself to him as well. So we say the moment that we know that the inheritance it does not go to them, then they're not interested in bearing her. So therefore she's a meis mitzvah. And that's why the husband, the kohen, even though Matay is not really his wife, can go ahead and be metame to them. What about why the father's in Yashna? So we already explained the concept of Hefke, Bez, and Hefke. So we're continuing now to explore the mission and trying to explain how is it that the Rabbanan could step in and go against the Torah. Says the Gemara, it says that if her husband's a kohen, she can eat truma. What do you mean? But Mahatayr not married. So we answer, we're talking about truma with the Rabbanan. We're talking about truma which is only the Rabbanan. Toshma have another proof. It says, Ochal truma tumeya, if somebody by mistake, if you by mistake ate truma, which is tameh, so you have to pay back the coin, you have to pay back a penalty also of a fifth, which is really a quarter. You have to pay it back. But what you ate with truma, that's tameh. What do you pay back? You have to pay back chulin. We know from the pasuk we learn out, it says you should give to the kohen kodesh. So we learn something that can become kodesh. In other words, it's chulin. Tahirim. Chulin that can become kodesh, therefore it has to be tahir. And there's a machlekes, what happened now if you did it b'mezid, the eight truma b'mezid, in addition to money, there's a chiva misa b'dei shemayim. So there's a machlekes whether in that case you have to pay money as well, because we have a principle kamle midrabbanei. Teisha argues that you still have to pay money because the money here is not a compensation; it's more like a kapara. In fact, if the kohen says, "No, what? Don't worry about it. You don't have to pay me," it doesn't help. You have to pay because you need that particular kapara. So, but other Rishonim say no, that you don't have to pay money. But we're only talking about b'shegig. Anyway. What happened was, that's the din, you have to give chulin to. What happened? You shilum chulin to. What happens instead? You paid with chulin that was tameh. And so what happens then? So it's not chulin to, it's chulin tameh. Sumcha says, if you didn't realize that this chulin was tameh, then tashlumin. It's a good payment. But mezid, if you did it deliberately, ain't tashlumin, it's not considered a good payment, and you have to pay again. Chachamim say, echadzeh, tashlum of tashlumin, that what you paid, in other words, it became truma. Whether you knew that it was tameh, whether the chulin, whether you didn't know tameh, that chulin now becomes truma, and it's just truma tameya. But even if you did it b'shegig, in both cases, you still have to pay again chulin tahirin. What we're trying to understand, let's understand the first view of Sumcha has been mezid. You said if he did deliberately gave him chulin tameh, ain't tashlumin. And it sounded like the tashlumin is what not only you have to pay again, but that it did not become truma. It doesn't become truma tameh. In other words, if you gave chulin to the kohen, it's not considered a compensation at all. Forget about the fact you have to give another compensation. This itself is not considered a compensation. Now the question is, why not? Tavla bracha. Even if you gave the kohen chulin, which is tamei, it's still better off than the kohen had truma tamei. When the kohen had the original truma tamei, what can you do with it other than burning it and enjoying it while he's burning it? You can't do anything with it. Now that you gave him chulin tamei, okay, true, it's tamei, but when he himself will become tamei, people inadvertently become tamei throughout their lives, he'll be able to eat that. So there's still a benefit to the kohen. Why do you say that nothing happened? So good on him. What you ate was something that was not suitable at all for the kohen. You couldn't eat it ever. The commercial media, you paid him, reimbursed him with chulin at least. That's tamei, so at least he can eat that while he's tamei. Something good came out of it. Says the Gemara. And not only that, even though when he paid it to the kohen, it turns into truma, but at least his intention was to give something beneficial to the kohen. Says the Gemara. What was it? Sorry, it was all off the place. The Gemara, you're right. Omar of the Rav, I'm the others like Kadi said it. Chasuri mechs, a few words are missing. But Hachi, Tony, this I should learn. If he ate truma tamei, this is what should say. Then mishalim called. If he ate truma tamei, then anything that he paid is good enough. If he ate b'shegig, anything he paid is good enough. He could even pay with chulin tamei. Still better off the kohen than what he had when he was truma tamei. But ochal truma tahira, if he ate truma that was tahir, mishalim chulin tamei. If he ate tahir dika truma, the only way you can be considered compensation is if you give chulin tahir. If you give him shilim chulin tameim, if you gave him chulin tameim, he's not better off. Before he had truma tahira, now you gave him chulin tameim, he's not better off. Sumchas amam shurameya, so Sumchas says name rameya. B'shagig, if you did b'shagig, tashlum of tashlumin, it's a valid payment. But b'mezid, if you did it b'mezid, ain't tashlum of tashlumin. We penalize you and we say that it's not a valid payment. Say, whatever you paid is still a payment, even though it's tamei. It's still a payment, but since you ate truma, which is tire, initially we thought it's talking about truma that was tamei, and therefore we couldn't understand even chulin tamein is better off than truma tire. So now we're saying, no, we're talking about this. The words that are missing are that you ate truma, which is tire, and you have to pay back with chulin tire. And the Chachamim say that if you pay back chulin tamei, I don't care if it's your fault, not your fault. Whatever you paid goes to the kohen, but you have to pay it again. You have to pay again chulin tire. Now the question is, according to Rameh, you tell me, but it's not considered payment. I don't understand. But according to the Torah, it's a valid payment. What's a valid payment? What happens? You gave the kohen chulin that's tamei. You gave the kohen the chulin. You ate truma Torah. You gave him chulin that's tamei. The kohen, the fact that the kohen would own it, Torah, it's considered a good payment. But here, there was license to a good payment. So now, if this kohen would turn around and take this chulin tamei and give it to a woman, he gave her something of substance, something of value, she would be engaged to him. But because you came along and penalized him and said, nothing happens, it's not a payment, it's not actually a payment at all. If the kohen, it doesn't belong to the kohen. If the kohen that takes it gives it to a woman, she's not mekudesh. So Torah, she's a married woman. Because the Rabbanah stepped in and says no good, she's no longer a married woman, and then she can marry somebody else. According to Torah, if she lives with somebody else, the children become Zaydim. But the Rabbanah came in and overturned that. How can the Rabbanah go against the Torah? That's the most question here. If a kohen would have given it to a Isha, she would have been married to her. But the Rabbanah said, "Ain't it tashlum of tashlumin? It's not considered a valid tashlumin." The kasharina. And you go ahead and you're permitting a married woman to other people. How can a do that? Now the Gemara could have answered simply. We just said yesterday, hefker, bez, and hefker. When it comes to money, the Chacham had the right to take away from possession and make it ownerless. So therefore, even though Mahatayda, she should be a married woman, she isn't, because we say that the chulin tamei is no longer his. It says we don't just wantonly use that rule. We use it liberally. On the contrary, the only time we use hefker and hefker is if there's a reason to penalize you did something wrong. In this case here, the kohen didn't do anything wrong. Someone paid him with chulin tamei. What did the kohen do wrong? Absolutely nothing. So why should we penalize the kohen and make it hefker and hefker? We don't make hefker and hefker when the kohen, the person that we're dealing with, didn't do anything wrong. And therefore, we try to understand. So how can Chacham come along and say, it's not a payment? On what basis? How can I go against the Torah? Says you're right. When it says here, ain't tashlum is not a payment, it didn't mean it doesn't belong to the kohen. The boy the matter, All it means is Shalom Yechol Torah. He has to pay him also Chol Torah. We didn't mean that this payment is not a payment. The Kohen gets to keep both. He gets to keep the Chulin to main your game, but he still has to pay him again to make up for the fact that you ate Truma Torah. So more right away asked, isn't that what the rabbi said? So Sumchas Hain Rabban also say that regardless of Shegi made it, the payment is a payment, but you have to pay again. So what's the difference between Sumchas and the Chachamim? You're right. When it comes to Mezid, the Gemara says there's no difference. They both say the payment is a payment, but you got to pay again. Where they argue is by Shegit. If you did it inadvertently, the Rabbanah said, but even if you did it inadvertently, the payment is a payment, but you have to pay again. Chulun Teirin. And their Reb Meir says the payment is a payment, and you don't have to pay again. It's not your fault. And that's the difference. And why they're arguing? They're arguing whether we say, look, even though you did nothing wrong in this case, you weren't aware of it. But since if you did it on purpose, we'll have to make it pay again. We're going to penalize you that even if you did it by mistake, you have to pay again. And that's the argument. Do we make such a penalty or not? Toshma, so we're continuing along the same theme, whether the Rabbana can undermine the Torah. Toshma coming here, it says, by korban dam, shenitmer, the blood became tamei, the zarkai, and you went ahead and you sprinkled the blood. Bishagig, if you did a bishagig, it's a valid korban and atoned because the Kohen Gadol wore it deliberately, specifically for that reason, so that it should be mitayah, the blood. But the mezid lahurts, if he did it deliberately, the tzitz will not take any effect, and then the owner is not the schapid have to bring another korban because because the blood it was tamid. So the Gemara, now I don't understand. So we're saying like this: the blood became tamei, and you went ahead and sprinkled it. So why did you sprinkle it? If you sprinkled it by mistake, you didn't realize the blood is tamei. Okay, it's valid. If you sprinkle it on purpose, it's not valid. Now the question is, mahataida makes no difference why you sprinkle it. Mahataida, the blood automatically becomes tar because the kohen gadol was wearing a tzitz. So if it doesn't make a difference, if you sprinkle it on purpose, you didn't sprinkle it on purpose. How can the chacham come along and say no? It's not a valid korban because you on purpose you sprinkled the blood after sprayed the blood on the mizbeach after you knew that it's tamei, and the Rabban came along and said, it's not a korban. And what's the result of that? So the owner, the person who brought the original korban, has to bring a second korban. But really, mahataida, the second korban is extra, it's superfluous, so it's a chulin. It doesn't become holy because there's no need for it. And you're bringing a chulin ba'azor, which is not over nasei. So how can Rabban come along and say that? But the Torah said, let's ignore it. And as a result of that, a person will be bringing an animal to the Mizbeach, was not unnecessary. So the time we learned, what does the tzitzit tone for? Blood, basar, meat, and chaylev and fat. It became tummy. Bang the shaggy, bang the mates. I don't care if it's on purpose or I don't care if it have inadvertent. Bang but oined, bang with where you're compelled or whether willingly. Bang the yachid, bang with tzibur, whether it happened on your own or it happened in the community. The Rabban said clearly that we don't care, even though the Torah recognizes it as a valid korban, we're going to say it's not a valid korban. And you're forcing this person to bring another korban, and really, it's not a korban. You know what it means, lahurtza? Not that it was a korban. We're not going to force the person to bring the owner to bring another korban. He already fulfilled his mitzvah. Lahurtza means that the kohen, normally the kohen gets to eat portions of the animal. In this case, the kohen will not eat portions of the animal. Lahatir basa ba'achila. Lahurtza the korban means that we're not going to allow them to eat the meat and eat the meat. I will bailim bischapraboy. But the owner, the yid who brought that korban, he fulfilled his obligation and he's been discharged and he's been atoned for. It's just that the kohen cannot eat from that korban. So the Gemara, I don't understand. It was safe. Ultimately, but the fact that you're denying the kohen from eating meat, and why is that important? It's not just a fringe benefit or dividend that the kohen has. That's part of the process of kapara. The Chesivit says, they should be eaten by those who are involved in the atonement, which is the kohen eat and the bailim become forgiven. So we need the kohenim to eat, and the Rabbanan and the Torah says that you're saying yourself there's a valid korban. So how can I come and stop the kohenim from eating? Says the Gemara, Amalei, this is a very important rule. Sheiv v'altasa shiny. He said the Rabbanan, Rab Chizda seems to be learning the Rabbanan can never come and go against the Torah. What we're answering here is that when the Rabbana can come along, the Rabbana can stop us from going ahead and do something. So the Rabbana say, you know what? Stay passive. Don't do it. They cannot tell you go against the Torah, but they can tell you don't go ahead and do what you have to do. And therefore, this is called a shevatai. Sit there and don't do anything. So they're not undermining the Torah. For example, here, don't eat the meat of this korban. And even though there's a mitzvah say that for kohenim to eat the meat, they say sheval taisa. So it's not proactively going against the Torah. You're not eating, so therefore passively you're going against the Torah. That they could do. But in the case of truma, where you're telling me that that you took truma to Meah deliberately, and you decided to use that to offset the rest of your field, that was a proactive measure. That's defiance against the Torah. There, the Rabbanon cannot go against the Torah. And that's what Nosha Bar Oishi's vort is, and that's why even if you did it deliberately, it's still a valid truma, not like Rav Chizda. But we'll agree to Rav Chizda, but where it's in a passive way, yes, you can. Amalei, so Rav Chizda said, you stumped me. Rav Chizda said, I have a whole list of questions that I was going to ask you, but your one answer you just gave me now was so brilliant, it answers all my questions. Because, I mean, right away now in mind, you can think of it. What do you mean? We don't bench lulav on Sukkot when it falls on the Shabbos. We don't blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah when it falls on the Shabbos. Here the Torah says you should blow, the Rabbanan say don't. So we have many instances where the Rabbanan step in and stop us from the Torah. But all of those cases, as we're going to see, are all sheval taisa. Sit in one place, just don't do what the Torah said in a passive way. So we're not actively going against the Torah. We're just sitting there, sheval taisa, sitting, don't do anything. So he said it like this. He said, I have a whole bunch of questions I was planning to ask you. Where the Rabbanan step in and say, the advocate of the Torah says, we don't want you to do it. For example, the case of an oral, the din is by an oral. If somebody was not circumcised, we learned right before that if you now circumcise yourself, it's like you tameh and you become clean, and therefore you have to wait 7 days, and then you can go ahead and eat the Korban Pesach. Somebody older who didn't have a bris milah, and it says here that. And a ger that converted on Erev Pesach, we decided not to accept the person. Now the question is, why do we decide not to accept the person? The ger was not tamei, because as a goy he doesn't become tamei. There's no laws of tumah by a goy. So as soon as the guy, he should maybe become Pesach. We are worried that maybe next year he'll become tamei, and he'll go to the mikveh and he'll say, well, last time I went to the mikveh, I was able to eat Korban Pesach straight away. He doesn't realize that there's a big difference because last year you weren't tamei, and now you are tamei. So we see the Rabban, because of a concern, prevented you from doing a mitzvah of the Torah, eating Korban Pesach. But as we just pointed out, that's in the passive way, Or the next case is Hazah. Sprinkling on Shabbos is only a shvus, fixing yourself up. It's only Isha the Rabban. If the 7 days expire and Pesach is Motzei Shabbos, so you have to be in the Korban Pesach on Shabbos itself. Even though we do all these other malachas, we shecht and everything else, which is also Mahatayra, we allow you, but not the sprinkling. It's not Doicha Shabbos. Rabbanan step in again. Well, another one is Yevamos. Let's say you need a knife to do the bris milah, and the Rabbanan said you're not allowed to carry it through a carmelist, even though it's only us and the Rabbanan. We're going to stop you. Or sadin betzitzis. The Torah says you can wear klaim and tzitzis. You can have wool and tzitzis on a linen beged, and the Rabbanan said, no, we don't want that to happen, because what happens at night when there's no mitzvah, or at night, or a dress, a garment that's specifically for the night, what happens is there's no mitzvah then. If we allow you to wear tzitzis when there's a mitzvah, you're going to continue wearing it even when there's no mitzvah anymore, and then you're not allowed to wear it. So we don't want you to have a linen bag, we don't want you to put wool tzitzis on it. So you can have a linen bag and you're not going to have any tzitzis on it. Again, it's a passive way. Tais already asked a very important question. Tais asked a question when it comes to the case of tzitzis, what do you mean it's sheval taisa? You're covering yourself when you take that linen beged, let's say, with no tzitzis hanging from there, and you're putting it or wrapping around yourself. You just did an active avera. It's not a passive. Passive is you don't do anything. Here you put on a four-cornered garment with no tzitzis on it, so it's active. Why do we put that under the category of sheval taisa? So Taisha's answer, which is a very important thing, Taisha says there's no avera putting on a beged without tzitzis on it. It's only after you're wearing it now kicks in the mitzvah of wearing tzitzis. So the instant that you put this garment on you, there was no aveda yet. Now you have a mitzvah to do it, but you're not going to do it. So the mitzvah is, that's why we wrap ourselves while we make a bracha. We already started the mitzvah, because that's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is not the wrapping. The mitzvah is once you put it on you properly. That is when the mitzvah is. So the Gemara continues. So that's another example. And then we have also the case of Kivsei Atzeres. And Rashi says himself, he's not exactly 100% sure what it means, Kivsei Atzeres Shavuos. Interesting, but to learn the Gemara of Shavuos, first day Shavuos, and this is talks the Gemara, Hashgacha Pratis talks about Shavuos. The carbon of Shavuos is 2 loaves of bread, and we also bring 2 lambs. And What happens if you shechted these lambs not as a korban shlamim, but by mistake you shechted them, have in mind to be an oila, where it gets fully burnt on the mizbeach. So the din is that you nevertheless you spray the blood and you eat the meat, because any korban that you did not do for the correct reason is still kosher. But the person is not yotzei. We learned that in the beginning of Zvachim. That if you burn an animal, except for korban chatas, if you burn an animal, you had the wrong thing in mind, it's still a valid korban, except you did not fulfill your chi, whatever your chi is. Now, what happens if it's if let's say Shavuos fell out on Shabbos, and you're allowed to obviously bring the korban on Shabbos, and by mistake you did it on Shabbos, but loy lishma, you did not have the right korban in mind. In this case, don't spray the blood. Now, why not spraying the blood? We know that it's a valid korban, even though you're not Yetzi Yom Tov Shavuos, but it's a valid korban. And who said you're not allowed to spray blood? We said before it's only a Shavuos because you're fixing it up. It's only also a Rabbanon. And yet it says you shouldn't spray, and we're taking away this mitzvah of spraying the blood for a korban. Every korban you have to spray the blood. You have to also roast the fats on the zbech. Masbika Sheval Tais is different. The next two cases show from lulav is when they fall on a Shabbos. But hashta the shons on Sheval Tais. Now that you answered me this rule about Sheval Tais, if you're passive, then lemeka, there's not a problem. How cool is Sheval Tais? All of these cases I was going to ask you are all Sheval Tais. So I'm stumped. I have no question for you, at least from all of these questions. So the Gemara steps in. The Gemara asks more questions. Toshma coming here. It says, a love tishma. If a novi comes amongst you and tells you to do something, whatever he says, they love tishma. You should listen to the novi. If a proven novi. Even if he tells you go ahead and violate one of the mitzvot Torah. For example, Eliyahu Har Carmel. You're in the Israeli times in the base of Mikdash, and yet he built himself a bomber on Har Carmel to disprove all the false nevi habal. Even though what he did was against the Torah, listen to him. Hakoil, if he shall listen to him for the moment, whatever he tells you, do. Shmala, listen to him. So we see clearly that Rabbanan, Eliyahu and Rabbanan, came out against the Torah, and we listened to him, and that was an active way. He went and broke Kabbalah on a bomber. So we answer Shani Yosin is different. The Chsiv, it says clearly in the pasuk that if you have an established Navi, a love tishmun. The Torah says, it's not the rabbis made something of it. The Torah says, listen to the Navi. In other words, even if it's against what the Torah says. It says, so let's learn from Eliyahu Navi, then other cases where the Rabban have the right to overturn the Torah, even if it's a proactive way. When it answers Migdam Milsa Shain, the story of Eliyahu Navi is very different. Over there, he was trying to represent the Torah against all these false prophets. And what he did was he wasn't worried about the prophets, he was worried about Klal Yisrael, because everyone was a Pesach Shtei Sifim. They were hedging the bets. They didn't know who to listen to, because Eliyahu was outnumbered by this Nevi Abal. So Lamig de Milsons, under such circumstances, he was allowed to go ahead and do that. So you can, it's an exception. When we continue along the same theme, Toshma, we learned that if a husband sends a get to his wife through a shliach, and then eventually when it gets there, she gets divorced. But what happens before the shliach arrived in the city where his wife lives? He went to a bezdin and he says, I regret what I wrote. I want to cancel my get. So technically it's canceled. She's no longer divorced, because by the time the shliach arrived to her destination, the get is invalid. But what happens, but came along Rav Gamliel and said, Shmuel said, we have to stop this, because the woman won't know that the get is not, and the shliach doesn't know. She thinks she's divorced. She'll get remarried, and it turns out to be a while later we'll find out that she married illegally, and her children will be mamzer. It's not fair. So therefore, Rabbi Shmuel says we don't allow him to cancel the get. So Toshma, we learned what happened if he did it. He didn't listen to the rabbis, and he decided to cancel the get. So according to the first opinion, Rabbi Bittul Bevutul, whatever he did, he did. The fact is that's what he did. So therefore, it's a good bittul. As annoying as it is, more than annoying, as wrong as it is ethically wrong. Nevertheless, his bittul is mavutul. It's a good cancellation. Shmuel says, "Einu yachol." No, we removed his authority. We removed his ability to cancel the divorce, because he's not allowed to put in such a predicament. Shmuel says, "Einu yachol." He can't. Once he sends it out to the shliach, he cannot in any way alter anything about this get. It's done. Now the question is, the fact is, Mahatayda, it's a valid get. The rabbis came in and said his bittul is not valid, and therefore she's a divorced woman. So according to Torah, she's a married woman. Here the Chacham proactively gave her a get, which is not a valid get from the Torah, and say, you're a free woman now. She can get remarried. How can the Rabbanan, here's an active way going against the Torah. The get is but. Because of this authority of the rabbis, we're going to allow this woman and say, you're no longer a married woman. So the Gemara lays down here a very important rule, which, as the Rishonim say, we never really use unless you have those no Breda, which the Gemara usually gives us examples, and that is the following: Man the Mekadesh. Whenever you get married, you say Harezu. This is you're Mekudesh to me, Kedas Moshe Yisrael, in accordance with the traditions of Moshe and the laws of Moshe and Yisrael. So therefore, every person who gets married is following, is putting themselves and trusting themselves in the hand of the rabbis. Man the Mekadesh, Hadat Rabban Mekadesh. Whoever gets married is doing it in the hands of the Rabbanon. Ba'afki inu Rabbanon lekedushin. We go ahead and we annul this kedushin. We cancel this kedushin. By what? By saying that we learned before, like hefker doesn't hefker. The money is on Alyssa. The money that you gave her initially to be mekudesh, retrospectively was never yours, and therefore, retrospectively was never yours, and therefore you're never mekudesh. So the first husband, in this case, we're going to say, why is the get? Is what do you call it? That even though the Torah said the get is cancelled, but we're going to say that the second kedushin was never a kedushin. Says the Gemara. So we're going to say as if you were never married in the first place. So says the Gemara. So that's why. So that's how we help this woman out. So even though she's not aware and everything else, he's trying to cancel the get and keep her as a married woman. And we're going to say that she's still divorced. Why is she divorced? We can't go ahead and divorce her. Torah says not. If the Torah says not a valid get, the reason why she's divorced is because we remove the kedushin in the first place from her. So Teish already asked in Gittin. Teish already asked. So why every time we have a predicament of mamzerim, let's just go ahead and every time a woman commits adultery and has children with the second person and mamzerim, let's just say that she was never married to the first person. And Teish says we don't do anything to increase, to weaken the category of marriage. Says I understand the Kodesh B'Kashba. I understand when money is involved. The Chacham come along and say, okay, it's hefker, and hefker is no longer his money. But Kodesh B'Biyah, remember there are three ways of getting married. One of them is through Biyah, one of them is just through relation. How can the Chachamim cancel that? We say yes. Shavye Rabbana Libilose Bilaznos. The Chacham have such power, such authority that they can say that even though his intention was to marry her, biblically, the Chacham come along and say that it's no longer that biyah, all those biyahs was nus, not marriage. There's some Rishonim who want to learn that there's one version of the Rambam that the Gemara's question is that's good by money, but not by kedusha, by biyah, because they want to learn that money is only midrabanan. If a woman gets engaged to a person and money, the ring is only Rabbanan, and Biyah is Mahatayr. That's the most question. Okay, the Rabbanan come and cancel the Rabbanan. What about Biyah? But most of Rishonim hold that money also is Mahatayr, and the most question merely is that here's Hefker and Hefker, and here you don't have Hefker and Hefker. Says he want to further touch back on here. Another question I'm going to go to Yaakov Shemaiti. I heard Shebezdin Umakin. I heard that a Bezdin sometimes has authority that Makin they go ahead and they can punish somebody even though there's no basis for it in the Torah that for this sin you should incur such a punishment. And not because you went ahead and you violated the Torah. But rather, lots of the Torah you want to do to support the Torah. There's a story with a person, a person was riding a horse on Shabbos. What's the prohibition of riding a horse on Shabbos? Rabbanan. And be made one of the times of the Syrians, the Greeks, and they brought into Bezin Visakuluhu. This is the Syrian Greeks when Hellenism was spreading everywhere, abounding everywhere. And the Chachamim decided to come like a ton of bricks, and they killed him for violating an Issa de Rabbanan, riding a horse on Shabbos. And they stoned him. Not because that's the what he deserves, but rather because the time necessitated it, because people were becoming very relaxed, especially Hellenism. So the first thing was that the Rabbanan don't mistook him and all that. They don't believe in the Rabbanan, so weakened the authority of the Rabbanan. So therefore they came out so strong. There's another incident with the person he had marital relations with his wife out in public under a tree, a fig tree. And they brought him to Bezin, this Hilkeyu, and they gave him lashes. Now, there's no such thing that if you weren't sneers that you should get punished with lashes. The time necessitated it because people were behaving very lewdly, and therefore they had to do something. And more answer again. So we see the Rabbana going against the Torah says those are punishment and proactively are. And we're using the theme that we had before by Eliyahu Navi, Migder Milsa Shaina. Sometimes the call of the hour says you have to do things, and the Rabbanan have the right. They're doing it to strengthen the power of the Rabbanan to help out the Torah as well. And Migder Milsa Shaina, to make a fence and make it stronger, is very different. Says the Gemara, Loi Ze Metamin Law. Okay, now we're going back to the Mishnah. This I told you about the Kesef, whether the Rabbanah, the Raisa, Rashi talks about it as well. So the Mishnah says that continues going. That if she inadvertently she thought her husband died, and then she married another person, is loy ze v'ze metamin. That neither the first husband or the second husband, they were kohenim, can go ahead and metamit her. Why not? Minola. How do we know that? See, it says that a kohen is not allowed to go ahead and defile himself to anybody, only to his relatives or close to him. And he spells out his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, brother. And then it says we dash in Ramamah, and we said she'eda is a ishte, that she'eda is his wife. Uksiv, it says there's another passage that says that a husband should not go ahead and be metame. We say a husband, obviously talking about his wife, and because it'll desecrate him. So sometimes he's allowed to go to his wife, and sometimes he's not allowed to go to the levaya of his wife. How's it work? Yesh baal shem metame, baal shem metame. Okay, how's it work? Metame who leaves to shade. If she's a kosher woman, and he can go ahead and metame. But if she's puzzle, so in this case, because she was a married woman when she married a second guy, so she cannot. Either husband cannot be metame. Even though it was inadvertent, says it was just neither that have rights to her in anything that she finds. Time and my why he more said, what's the reason? Why is it that Rabbanan made a special takana? Whatever she finds belongs to the husband because he pays for all the provisions. What's the reason? We want them to have a good rapport, and he's working so hard and he's providing for her. So therefore, anything that she earns or things that she gets, he has rights to. But over here, we're happy for them to fight. We want them to divorce. We want them to divorce because she's a married woman. She's with the second guy. Well, the Maisi also have no rights to her earnings. Same thing. Time why because he provides for her. Over here, keeping the Mezailah less because he shouldn't be providing for her. He's Maisi allowed today. Why should he be entitled to her earnings? Well, I made from today no authority to annul any vows which affect their relationship. What's the whole reason why the husband has the right to Kadesh like this Ghana in order that they shouldn't have for example, she makes a vow which actually affects him directly. So therefore, we don't want that he should find this whole thing very humiliating and so on. But if you find humiliating, very happy, so you divorce her. We want to encourage you to divorce her. And then it says, and if she was a Bas Yisrael, and as a result of that, because she was a married woman with the same guy, she's now considered a Zaina, even though it's not a fault, and she can no longer marry a Kohen. Says in Pshiti, that's what a Zaina is. If she's a married woman living with another person, it doesn't matter whether delivered or not. So you're right. The Chiddush in the Mishnah is Bas Levi min Hamaiset Itzchlei. The Chiddush is if the next din in the Mishnah is if she's a Bas Levi and she and then she married another guy, she forfeits her rights to have Maiset. Says the Gemara, Bas Levi min Hamaiset min Mishlah. Why should she disqualify? But good. Okay, why? Let's focus on that. Why should she lose her rights to eat Maiset? What for? But Tanya, we learned Levia Shanishbiza for Levia. A Bas Levi was kidnapped. Bila's nus, or even if she had extramarital relations, whatever is nus, Noisla Maisa V'chela, she can continue eating Maisa and eat. So what's the problem? Amar Rav Sheda says in this case, Kanasa, we penalize her because she relied on a single aid and she didn't do her homework. She should have done her homework to see whether her husband actually was passed on or not. And because she didn't do any homework, we penalize her, and therefore she loses her rights to Maisa.